Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist and the magical mystery tour called life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author Kristen Chimack. Kristen hails from Illinois, and when she is not writing books, she works as a global accounts manager at HelmsBriscoe in Bloomington, Illinois, and she is the CEO and owner of Down to Earth Insights LLC, where she performs impactful real-world coaching for professional success. Tonight, we will be discussing Kristen's latest book release, The Cost of Staying. Find your courage, choose yourself, and discover what awaits in life and career. Kristen, it's a great honor and privilege to have you on the show. I'd like to start off by asking you, Kristen, please tell our listeners what your book, The Cost of Staying, is about.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. The Cost of Staying is about something that I feel like we rarely discuss, and that is how expensive it actually is to stay in situations that no longer serve you. We're good at calculating the cost of leaving things, like the cost of leaving a relationship, the cost of leaving jobs, the identities we've built, but we rarely kind of flip that perspective and talk about what's the cost to us to actually stay. And so in my book, I share my journey of walking away from a 30-year corporate career. I also share different pieces of my life where I walked away from a 10-year relationship, where I've had to walk away from friendships, and just the framework overall that I've developed through those experiences, which I call the growth through grief spiral. And the book kind of walks readers through the 4 phases of that spiral. So the whispers, those are sort of the subtle signs that are telling you something's off, that you hear them in your head a lot of times. The second phase then is letting go, where you're releasing what no longer serves you. And that then opens you up for the possibilities and discovering what might be waiting for you on the other side. And then finally, kind of integration. How do you bring that all together to live your most authentic life? So the book itself is packed with just practical tools, personal stories, and I call them permission slips to kind of help readers choose themselves, maybe for the first time ever, and really kind of thinking of it as just a conversation you're having with a friend.
Now, Kristen, while you were writing and researching this book, did you interview other professionals to obtain any insights for this book, or is it based solely upon your individual professional and personal experiences?
It's primarily, I would say, based on my experiences throughout my life. However, as being a leadership coach, I do have a window into what a lot of other professionals are experiencing. And just as I've been out talking about my book, have really been able to kind of add to the richness of my own personal stories through just the clients that I coach. Although I don't talk specifically about any one client, I do bring in some of their experiences, but it's primarily based on my story.
Kristen, what professional and or personal travails, if you're willing to discuss it, that you experienced that impacted your work and life, kind of inspired you to write this book? Is there something you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think the one thing, as I had worked for the same organization for 30 years, my father had worked for that company for a long time, and they were just such a part of my life that towards the end of my career, as I was experiencing different situations with a toxic area that I was working in, one of the things that I started to really realize is I had worked my entire career to get to the executive level of this company, really, to the detriment of my personal life in some respects. And I realized that I was doing that because I wanted to change the culture of the organization. And as I found myself at the executive level, everything I'd ever worked for, with the hopes of being able to have broader influence and make some changes, I started to realize that the organization and the culture was much, much bigger and stronger than any one person or even handful of people could probably impact. And so as I started to face the reality of I probably wasn't going to be able to make some of the changes or the impact that I wanted, I started to show up more authentically as myself, playing a little bit less the corporate game. And as I started to do that, one of the big realizations I had was that all along I thought I had been showing up really as my authentic self, but what I realized was I'd actually been showing up in a way that was authentic to who they wanted their executives to be, or they wanted their leaders to be. And so it was really through that I started to realize that I was a little bit lost, a little bit out of alignment with my true values. And the book and kind of the process that I went through to finally make the decision to leave the organization and start my own business was a lot about kind of being true to who I was and living within my values and my passions.
Kristen, in your life and travels, how often do you meet people whose careers were aligned with their hopes and expectations when they entered the working world? Is that a rare creature, a person who actually has a career that it was aligned with what they really wished and hoped for? How often do you encounter that in your life experiences?
I would like to say all the time I encounter that, but I think, honestly, the answer is not very often from my experience. What I tend to hear more frequently is from people is, well, I kind of fell into this, or I never really thought I'd end up here. And so I think that's because, one, our education system often kind of pushes us to choose a career path before we really know ourselves, and then kind of the inertia of life just carries us along. But, what I find fascinating, though, is that the people I meet who seem most fulfilled aren't necessarily those who kind of followed their original plan. They're the ones who had the courage to redefine success on their own terms, sometimes multiple times throughout their career. They've learned to kind of listen to that inner voice, or the whispers I call them, that there's more for you, or that this doesn't fit you anymore and you need to go find something more. So I think of it a lot. I like to think of it as like the clothes that we keep in our closet that don't quite fit, but we hang on to them anyway. Careers can be a lot like that. And so we outgrow them, but we keep trying to force ourselves or squeeze ourselves into them because we've invested so much, or because we're afraid of what might happen if we let go. So for me, I find sometimes the most inspiring conversations I have these days are with people who are asking, what if success looks different than what I've been taught or what I originally thought? And those are the people who seem to kind of find the alignment, not with their initial expectations, but with something deeper and that's much more authentic.
Kristen, is there a time in one's life when it is too late to make a professional change, or is it never too late to make a professional change? Based on what you wrote in the book, how do you feel about that?
Personally, I don't think it's ever too late to make that change and to choose yourself. I think that, you can do that whenever you want. I left my corporate career after 30 years at the age of 53. I know people who've made bigger pivots in their 60s and 70s. But, what I've learned is that age isn't really the barrier, it's fear. And I actually think age gives us some unique advantages when making big transitions. We've collected enough life experiences to kind of know what really matters. And we've built transferable skills through all the other experiences that we've had. And most importantly, I think we've seen enough of life to understand that security isn't just about a steady paycheck, or happiness isn't just about that steady paycheck. It comes with peace of mind, alignment with your values, the freedom to be yourself. And that doesn't always mean it's the easiest path. When I left my executive role, I had to confront some real fears about financial security and my identity and starting over at the age of 53. But I also had to ask myself, what was the real cost of staying in a situation that really was just, I was frustrated. I was in a bad mood most days. I was exhausted just from mentally having to play the game. And so I think the question isn't really, am I too old to change, but rather, what am I willing to risk to change? And that's kind of, for me, that's a question worth asking no matter what your age is.
Now, Kristen, in your book, you talk about peace of mind and leaving toxic relationships. In the book, Cost of Staying, do you discuss spiritual healing in the book, Cost of Staying? Do you discuss that at all?
I don't explicitly focus on spiritual healing kind of through the lens of any particular tradition or religion. I do talk quite a bit about the holistic nature of well-being. And, one of the core concepts, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the book, I call the whispers. And those are sort of those subtle signals from our inner wisdom telling us that something needs to change. And I find so often that sometimes those whispers come through kind of our physical bodies long before our minds kind of catch up. So I share a lot about just how my own body was keeping score through tension and headaches and jaw clenching and sleep disruption and the Sunday night dreads that so many people experience. And that these physical manifestations weren't just random stress symptoms. They were messages pointing me toward greater authenticity. And so, most readers might connect some of this to their spiritual practices, and I think that's amazing. The framework of the Growth Through Grief framework is certainly compatible with various spiritual paths, but I've intentionally kind of presented it in a way that's accessible regardless of kind of your beliefs.
What you just said kind of reminds me of something. Like a week or so ago, I finished rereading Peter Matheson's bestseller, The Snow Leopard, and in the early part of the book, he quotes Carl Jung, or he quotes Jung about talking about learning to trust your inner voice, your Tao, as it were, in terms of Taoism. I mean, were you finally learning to trust your inner voice, listen to your inner voice, trust in it, and draw strength from that? Was that your case?
Yeah, I think throughout my life, right, there's been different points, and I talk about them in the book, where, there's just something inside that draws you to something or tells you there's more out there for you. And I think each time that I've listened to that and trusted it, it's led me to the right place. I think I've learned over the years to listen to it sooner and to trust it faster. But, I think with everything, you hear it in your mind and it kind of nags at you. And just learning to kind of trust that and take action.
Kristen, please tell our listeners, where can readers find this book, The Cost of Staying? Where can they find it?
Yeah, so it's super exciting. So the book, I am in pre-sale period now. The book will officially be up and for sale the end of this month on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can order it through your local bookstore. They can go to my website, www.KristenChimack.com, and there is a pre-sale order page up, and they can start ordering that today. But yeah, it's my first book, and I'm just super excited that we're getting close to having it out in the world.
So you have not written any other books, is that correct? This is your very first release, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Kristen, let's talk about yourself now. Where were you born and raised?
So I was born I'm born and raised in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri, Columbia, Missouri. We moved to Bloomington, Normal, Illinois when I was, first grade, I think. And then I went to school at Illinois State University, and after college, I wanted to get out of Illinois. So I moved and lived all over the United States with my professional career. So I went from Michigan to California, back to Illinois, to Virginia, Washington, D.C., and then back to Illinois again.
Wow, you've been all over. Kristen, if you are married, what does your husband do? And did your husband offer any input for your book, The Cost of Staying?
Yeah, so I am married to my husband, Mike. We're actually on the day my book releases will be our 11th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so he is a energy consultant and very analytical, and he was the first person to read kind of the first draft of the book, and he had lots of input and a lot of comments, and he's so detail-oriented that, he picked up on things and was able to ask me quite a few questions, and I had to try not to get defensive, but he had some great input, and I did make quite a few changes based on his input throughout the process. Now, he hasn't read it since the first draft. He is waiting to read that. He's, of course, on my book launch team, and so they are actually getting the first part of the book tomorrow. So he's going to read it with the rest of the family and team.
Now, Kristen, what led you to the professional career you are presently working on now?
Yeah, so, I was, like I said, in my corporate career, towards the end, I really found myself out of alignment with who I was. And so and this is kind of the process that's in the book, I really spent some time thinking about, what are my values? What do my core values mean to me? I even went as far back as, what did I like to do when I was 5 years old? What did I like to do when I was 12? What did I like to do when I was, a young adult, 25? And really spend some time thinking about, I know I'm not done. I'm 53 years old. I want to do something else. And the things that came out that I really love to do are help people. I love to create experiences, and I love to travel. And so through that, one of the things I loved about my role in corporate was just coaching and mentoring. So I initially started Down to Earth Insights, my coaching business, and that's really focused on providing, real world, down to earth, actionable guidance to people who are in transitions of some type. So whether they're moving to higher levels of leadership, they're moving to a new role, they're moving to a new company, or they're considering leaving corporate America to start their own business, just helping people through those transition points and figuring out what they could do, what they want to do, what they need to do. And then about 6 months into that, starting that company, I realized I missed travel, and I missed event planning. And so that's when I opened up I'm an independent licensee for HelmsBriscoe. And so I help individuals and companies find the perfect kind of hotel or resort to host their meetings at. And so I do the research, I negotiate the contracts, review the contracts, and help them kind of bring their experiences to life.
So getting back to your company, Down to Earth Insights, so you're dealing with individuals. You're not really dealing with corporations on a company level. You're dealing with individual people, who, okay, I want to make a transition. I want to make a change. Is that accurate? You're dealing with the individual. You're not dealing with a corporate entity. Is that correct?
Yeah, I primarily deal with individual one-on-one coaching. I have 1, 3, and 6 month coaching packages. I do some work with corporations as far as more speaking. So I do a lot of work around LinkedIn, how to build, a good professional profile, and how to network effectively. But for the most part, I would say 90% of the work that I do is on either an individual basis or a group of individuals in like a group coaching program.
Okay. Kristen, whenever I interview an author on my show, I always love to ask the standard question. When you were growing up, who were your favorite authors? And of those favorite authors, did any of them light the spark inside you to become an author or perhaps influence your writing style?
That's a great question. When I was young, I loved to read. I could get lost in a book for a whole day. The authors that I loved when I was a young child were, Ronald Dahl, Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume. I could just get lost in the stories and the fantastical worlds and kind of the just wonderfully weird characters that they would create. I loved, like Judy Blume, how she was a huge influence in that. I loved just how she wrote about difficult topics with such honesty and in a voice that felt like she was talking directly to me, and just the willingness to go there with some conversations. And then I don't know if any of them necessarily sparked my desire to write. I actually come from a family with writing in our blood. So my grandparents were writers, not necessarily published writers. Well, I take that back. Actually, they both were published in different ways, but I grew up watching them every day write and type in their journals. And, I'm actually in the process or beginning the process of rereading my grandfather's journals. I mean, years and years of journals where they wrote every day about their lives. And then my grandmother had written some children's books. And then I have a cousin who writes movies. So it was sort of all around, and it was always kind of an escape for me. And then as I've been writing this book, my niece, one of my nieces who's 11, she's been writing a book as well. So she's releasing her children's book on the same day that my book will release, and her book's called Read It, Ruby, about a little girl who doesn't like to read.
Please tell our audience, where can they find it? It's the same? Will it be up on Amazon and all the other places that you named earlier?
It will be, yes. Yeah.
I wish I could have her on the show. I'd love to interview her.
Yeah, she's She is super excited. What's kind of ironic is she doesn't really like to read, but she was over one day when I was talking to my book coach, and when I got off the call, she said, I have an idea for a book. Will you help me? And sure enough, within a couple of weeks, she had written a really cute book about a little girl who all the trouble she gets into because she doesn't read. So things like hot sauce and using hot sauce instead of ketchup, and going into the boys' room instead of the girls' room. And yeah, it's really cute. It rhymes. It's fun.
Who do you read now, Kristen? I mean, any authors who turn you on today? And who are your favorite authors of today?
Oh, today I find myself reading a ton of like nonfiction, self-help, business kind of books. So the last ones I've read, Mel Robbins, The Let Them Theory. I love Brene Brown. I like Colleen Hoover. I'm trying to think who else. Those are probably the big three that at least I've read most recently.
Last question, Kristen. What is your next book project, and when can we expect its release?
Oh my gosh, I got to get the first one out to the world first. I will tell you, I've definitely been thinking about the next one. I've actually been thinking about the idea of trying to write a fiction book. Because to me, this book was so personal to me and a lot of my story. I think there would be quite a bit of challenge in creating kind of a world from the start. And so I have a bit in the back of my mind about writing a fiction book. I have a couple more ideas for some nonfiction books, but I think first I just want to get this one out in the world, and we'll see. Maybe later this year I'll start on that second one.
Kristen, please let me know when it comes out. I want you on my show again. I would love to have you on the show again. Please?
Yes, I absolutely will.
Kristen, please take care. It's a great honor and privilege to have you on the show. May God bless and keep you always.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for my next show, where I will be interviewing author Selena Millman. Thank you and good night.